Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I'm sharing simple cards with printed papers and embellishments, and I'm using the Rosie Studio Jubilee collection. I have the 6-inch paper pad here, which has 20 different designs in it and 40 sheets total. So there's 2 sheets per design. These are perfect for card backgrounds and are scaled down in print from the 12 by 12 papers. Butterflies and Bows embellishment pack, and these have some natural dimension to them. They're stickers, but they have natural dimension, as well as the chipboard embellishments. Lots and lots of sentiments in this, as well as a few different images. I'm pairing this with the birthday just add cake kit add-ons. So I have 2 different dies here. I have the Colored Block Accent Arches dies. These pair with the Essential Arches die set that I use quite often. And then we also have the Stripe right die set that cuts stripes in a few different widths. So I have everything prepped and ready to go for my cards. I'm also pulling in these flower stickers from the Rosie Studios Breakfast in Bed embellishment bundle. These colors go well with the Jubilee collection, and I just didn't want to do only cards with those chipboard stickers as well as the butterfly and bow stickers, so I pulled in a few of the florals just for a little bit of variety. I have one of the pink prints from the Jubilee pack trimmed down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. And I'm just using a little bit of picked raspberry distress ink to do some ink blending around it. When I'm using printed papers, I will typically pick a more patterned paper for the mat to pull in some different colors. So I have one of the other papers here that is trimmed down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And then I'll pick one that's a little bit more monochromatic. So it's got some pattern, it's got some visual texture to it, but it doesn't have a lot of busyness to it to take your eye away from the embellishments. So I'm using some Barely Art glue in a fine line bottle. I use this glue for probably about 95% of the things I put together. It's a liquid glue, and having it in the fine line bottle means you can use as much or as little as you want. So it's great for assembling die cuts as well. And then I can move and shimmy the things in place, and I know that they're going to stay. These flower stickers are transparent, so we can see that pink paper behind there. It's not going to completely cover it. And then I'm going to pull out one of the chipboard sentiments from that chipboard embellishment pack. Now, because they're chipboard, it's going to add some natural dimension to that card, but I want to add just a little bit more texture. So I'm going to use a little bit of stickles in the centers of the flowers. This is an iridescent stickles, so it's not going to add any color. It's just going to add that texture and that sparkle. So we're not going to take any attention away from the patterned papers or the embellishments. We're just going to add just a touch of texture that is very subtle, and you only see it when you tilt it into the light. For my next card, I have another one of those printed papers that I've chosen, and I'm using some Evergreen Bough Distress ink to ink blend on this particular background. Now, this one is a print, and it's typically a little bit more busy. It's not really that busy than I typically will use on my backgrounds, but I'm going to use some of those striped die cuts for the detail on this card. So I have that pink here. This was the pink that was used for the center for the last card. I used the leftovers from that with that stripe right die set for one of the stripes here, and to give it a little bit of visual dimension, I'm going to use that picked raspberry around the outside edges. Now, that ink blending is a detail that you don't necessarily need to do, but I think it adds depth. It adds more interest to those pieces, and I just really like the look of it. So I will typically do that just to give it a little bit more interest and a little bit more visual dimension. Then I have that black printed paper that I used for the mat from the last card, and I used it with that stripe right die to die cut the smallest or the narrowest of those stripes, place those on top of each other, and we can put this onto our card base. Now, all the cards I'm creating are A2 cards, so this piece of cardstock or paper was trimmed down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And this is another one of those floral stickers from that embellishment bundle from the Rosie's Breakfast in Bed collection. So we have some white and black florals, and it coordinates with the black cardstock print that we have in the background. And then I'm adding one of those chipboard embellishments. The sentiment has a black background, but it has some gold for that sentiment. So it just gives you a little bit of extra texture with that metallic touch. For this next card, and you can see how quick and easy it is to create cards with printed papers and embellishments. And I always love when they're printed papers and embellishments from the same lines, because you know that they're going to coordinate well together and you're not going to have to spend a lot of time picking and choosing colors. You can add solid colored cardstocks with this, but this is why I typically will pair it with other printed papers in that same collection that are a little bit more subtle. So here we have a background paper here that has just some text on it with some colors. Now, when I cut out my stripes, I had intended for them to go side by side, how I first showed it there. But as I was creating, I just decided that I wanted them layered. I just liked that look a little bit more. So you can pick and choose how you use those stripes. I love the fact that they're different widths to pick and choose from. So you can choose which is going to be best for what you're creating. So the pennant banner there is a different cardstock from what I've been using. The other two pieces are leftovers from cutting down those pieces from those last cards. So I glued those stripes on top of each other and just used my shears to trim them down. I could have used my guillotine trimmer to trim it down before assembling, but it's much easier to just put the stripes down how I want them to be and then trim them down afterwards with those shears. I'm going to use one of those butterfly stickers. So these have two layers to them. One is the lower sticker layer, and then the other layer is the wings that pop up. So they are perfect for mailing. They don't add any dimension to your card at all. And there's some foil around the outside edge, so it has some beautiful metallic highlights to it. Once again, I'm going to add just a touch of that stickles on top of that foil. So it's also going to add that little bit of sparkle and that little bit of texture and give it a little bit more visual interest. Now that stickles is going to take a little bit to dry on the sticker because the sticker is actually like a plastic, it's not paper. So I'll set that aside to completely dry. But again, that's just going to add a little bit of sparkle and a little bit of texture. It doesn't add any color at all. So for the next card, I'm using that Color Block Accent Arches die set along with my Essential Arches die set. I have another one of the printed papers that is from this 6-inch paper pack cut down. And I'm just using that Evergreen Bough Distress ink to give it some visual dimension around the outside edges. I also cut a piece of white cardstock with the coordinating sized arch die from the Essential Arches die set. So we're going to get a different look here. It's going to look like an arch that has kind of like some squares etched out of it. So it creates a really unique look. That Color Block Accent Arches die set has several different sizes in there. So you can choose one that's as big as an A2 card. This one is the next size down in that set. And then I just picked the Essential Arches die that coordinated with it. So this one is an Essential Arches die that is just a little bit bigger. I wanted to add a mat around it. So this is another one of those printed papers. I'm just adding that picked raspberry distress ink around it. And you can see how it just gives it a little bit more character by adding that ink around it. Again, you don't need to do this, but I really love the look of it. It doesn't completely cover the patterned paper because I'm using distress ink, and distress ink is transparent. So you still see that pattern under there. It just adds a little bit more interest to it. So once again, I'm adding this to another A2 card base, and then I'm adding my layer on top of there with the white arch as well as the Color Block Accent Arches die cut. Then I have a couple more of those flowers that I'm going to add from the embellishment pack from the Rosie Studio Breakfast in Bed pack. That pack had a ton of flowers in it, and I used it in another video where I use that embellishment bundle and those stickers. So I will link to that at the end of this video so you can see more ways to use that. And you can use the techniques from that video with these pieces as well. Obviously, the embellishments in that embellishment bundle are going to be different than the butterflies and bows and the chipboard embellishments, but often they're something that you can substitute for them. So for this one, I chose to use one of the bows from that butterfly and bows embellishment pack. And then I'm going to take one of the sentiments from the chipboard embellishments. I love the fact that there's so many to choose from, but you can see that I'm having a hard time picking and choosing which one I want to use. I typically will choose what colors or look at what colors are in the card that I've created and choose something to go with those colors. It's not always necessary what the words are. If there's several that look similar, then I will pick and choose based on the words, but often it depends on which color is going to coordinate best with it. For my last card, I'm going to create a shaped card. I often use this Essential Arches die set for a shaped card. Any nesting die, you can do this, especially ones that have a flat bottom to them. They're really easy to use. I just use the largest size of the arch die, cut it twice, and then I put it on my score pal and scored it at 4.5 inches. Made sure that that fold line had a nice hinge to it, and then glued those two together, and we have a shaped card base. Then I took the same Arches die set and I cut a few sizes smaller. So 1 is the next size down. I just cut that out of white, but I'm going to make it gold with the Lisa Horton gold ink pad. And you could also use gold cardstock here. The ink pad just makes it nice and cheap and easy and quick, and it coordinates nicely with the gold accents in that printed paper. Now I just put that ink around the outside edges. I only need to do enough so that my printed paper covers up those edges. So we don't need to do that entire thing. That would just be a waste of ink. So now I can set that over to the side. I have my arch for the main part of my card already cut out. I'm going to use some Uncharted Mariner Distress ink around the outside edges of this one. Another option here would be to use that gold ink from Lisa Horton Crafts to do the ink blending. The only thing with the gold ink though is it's hard to get just a little bit around the edges. It's a really juicy ink pad, so sometimes I get too much, and I want this to be a little bit more subtle. So I just added that Uncharted Mariner Distress ink. The other thing with the Distress ink is it's not going to cover that pattern. The metallic ink is more opaque, so it would cover more of that pattern. And it would also kind of defeat the purpose of doing a gold mat around that. So I glued that onto my card base. And then I'm picking one of the sentiments to go with it. Because this print has some gold in it, I chose a sentiment that had a white background and a gold print on there. And then I already had a butterfly that I chose or that I wanted to go on this background. So that butterfly has a pop of color that is different from the background there, but the gold edges around there coordinate with the gold in the background. So it still works with it. Once again, I can't leave well enough alone, so I'm adding just dots of stickles around the outside edges of that butterfly, and then I let them dry completely. And I love those butterflies, and the bows are so easy to use because they're just like a plain sticker, but they add extra dimension because they pop up naturally and they fold down or lay down completely flat for an envelope, so there's absolutely no dimension to them. Now when I'm creating, I tend to naturally choose solid cardstocks, but working with printed papers are a really fun way to change things up just a little bit. Even a subtle print that's monochromatic just gives it a little bit of extra visual interest without any extra effort. And working with collections that have matching embellishments and sentiment pieces make it really, really easy to create some quick cards. So I created 5 cards in this video. I still have a ton of papers in that paper pack and a ton of those chipboard embellishments. And then I still have several of those butterfly and bow embellishments for future projects. But these would be great for mass card making because you could create many of the same design and just change up the embellishment and the sentiment and have a stash of cards ready to go. You'll find everything I've used listed and linked down in this description box below. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I really appreciate all the time that you're with me. Have a great day.